Hey, beautiful people, Dr. Eve here. I wanted to come in real quick and chime in on an evaluation that I found online of Cinchona bark and quinine for treating and preventing malaria. So there's a lot of conversation going on right now about anti malarial medication. I recently traveled to Ghana, and I understand that process of having to have the malaria treatment to even enter that country. And so, in that process, I had to go to my a travel doctor here in my county and get a prescription for that medication. Now, while I was able to get the prescription for that medication, my insurance only covered half of it. So the medication is really expensive. It was somewhere in the neighborhood of 140, and my insurance only paid half of it. So I had to pay $70 for this prescription that would only last me 20 days while I was there in the country, and for any follow up after leaving the country. So, with all of that said, I have been doing a lot of studying on airborne, these malarial borne diseases, right? And so I wanted to just come in really quick and do a quick evaluation on some findings that I discovered. I have been reading the survival medicine book, handbook by a military MD who put together a really rich text of how to take care of yourself when help is not on the way. So, what that simply means is if you are a trauma doctor in the military, you may find yourself anywhere. You may find yourself in the woods. You may find yourself in deep situations where medical help is not necessarily readily available. Now, I am not a MD, I am a PhD, a researcher. So, I am talking about what findings I discovered in the process of reading. So I have been reading this book, the Survival Medicine Handbook by Dr. Joseph Alton, who is a military MD, is an MD in the military, and his wife, Amy Alton, who is a nurse practitioner as well. So they've written this really hefty reference tool. And in this book, he talked about malarial borne diseases, and it was so interesting because his in his in his quest to offer us viable information when help is not on the way. Here's what I found. So he mentions in the book. He mentions in the book and recommended to get malarial medications. Alton discussed treatment for malaria when help is not on the way. He mentions chloroquine, phosphate, hydroxychloroquine, sulfate, but he also recommended on the list quinine sulfate and doxycycline. So it got me to thinking, wow, the bark of cinchona, I think that's how you say it, the bark of cinchona is a natural source of quinine. So I got to digging. Into the research, and I found something that was so profound, and I just had to come and share it here. So I am going to attach the research that I found in this video below in the description. But I want to talk about what they summarize. This article was done by a group of researchers, Gatlin, Garner, Chalmers. It was published in the Royal, let's see, what is this? The Royal I have to increase the size so I can see it. The Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine. It did not need ethical approval because it was a review, but quite an extensive review. And here's what they had to say in summary. The, the sometimes dramatic results of treatment for intermittent fevers with Cinchona bark dates back to 17th century, and bark was usually used effectively throughout the 18th century and beginning of the 19th century. Quinine, the active principle in bark, was isolated at the end of the second decade of the 19th century. And because it was more palatable and could be more confidently dosed than bark, it was widely adopted during the second half of the 19th century and the 20th century. In addition to the clear effectiveness of bark and quinine in treating intermittent fevers, their prophylactic administration also resulted in dramatically effective protection of individuals against these fevers. The therapeutic and preventive effectiveness of the bark and quinine in individuals was obvious without carefully controlled trials and was identified and adopted a century before the cause of malaria and the cycle of plasmodium had been elucidated. Although the important role of quinine in treating and preventing malaria in individuals became clear during the 19th century, differences between the effects of different quinine alkaloids and between quinine and bark and other anti-malarial drugs were not dramatic. This led to a recognition that formally planned experiments were required to obtain trustworthy results. Methodological ground rules began to emerge during the 1920s and 1930s, particularly in India and the Malay states. That comparison groups should be generated by alternation and that groups of sufficient size were required to obtain reliable evidence of treatment differences on substantive treatment outcomes. Although the use of quinine to treat and prevent malaria in individuals was dramatically successful, research in Italy in particular showed that scaling this up to prevent malaria in populations was not as successful, both because of poor compliance with self-medication and because of frequency of reinfection. So there were some clear reasons why. This general conclusion applied except in circumstances like prisons and navies, for example, in which community self-discipline could be assured, right? So community self-discipline has to be assured. Like, it's like when they told us that when I went to Africa, I was given a prescription. I had to be disciplined enough to take it. Because if I wasn't disciplined enough to take it, then I could very well become infected with malaria because it's such a thing in Africa. So I wanted to just share that because I thought it was really interesting how they're using this bark an alternative to malarial medications. It is actually a derivative of this medication that is being used, as you can see by the mere mention of the actual drugs that were recommended. And when you think about the drugs that were recommended, all had quinine in it. Quinine, chloroquine, phosphate, hydroxychloroquine sulfate, all of these things, quinine sulfate, all of these things consisted of quinine. And quinine is derived from the cinchona tree. I just thought that was interesting. Because I am into everything alternative, like I don't want to be putting where they've added something to it, because that's when, when you start adding things to a natural herb, then you start having side effects. Sometimes you wonder on the prescription, why should I take that? That's got a gazillion side effects. But the natural herbs, give you what you have. You get what you get, that natural herb, which is the root. The root of the quinine. Quinine is derived from the cinchona bark. So I was able to grab me a couple of things. I got the cinchona whole herb pills, the actual 60 vegetable capsules. I also got the powder so I can make my own capsules, because it is 100% non-GMO. Let me just read it to you. Ingredients: 100% cinchona bark, ground cinchona pubescens, origin Ecuador, storage dry, cold, and dark conditions, dietary and allergy information, non-GMO, gluten-free, suitable for vegans and vegetarians. That's the powder. Okay. And then I also got what? The bark. I actually got the bark because I'm gonna make a tincture out of it, because I have an herbal apothecary, and I am storing and creating my own tinctures for long-term use. So there you have it. Wanted to share that with you all. I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, so there are alternatives, and so use this at your own risk. Do your own research. I'm going to put the link to this document, this research, into the description, so that you will have access to read this for yourself, right? We perish for the lack of knowledge. Again, I am a PhD. I do extensive research, and I look at the analysis of the data that has been collected, who it was used on, when it was used, why it was used, the methodology, and all the things that help me to derive or come to a specific conclusion. And in everything, what inevitably what was concluded, that it was actually an effective use over centuries. That was enough for me to say, I'm gonna try it. Anyway, use at your own risk. Do your own research. Check out the link below for the article to read for yourself. Peace and blessings. May you have the most amazing day. Whatever you do, let no one get in the way on your journey beyond. This is Dr. Eve. I am a community health and human service educator, wanting to always make sure that you have access to human services and the resources you need to make great decisions. Peace and blessings, and may you have a great evening. Peace and blessings.